Hello everyone, and welcome to this week's episode of Revenge is Ice Cream. First up we have, I reported a thief at work and was fired and banned from the store for it, so I got the manager's nephew arrested and the manager fired. By more on my own. This happened many years ago, but I still pat myself on the back for it. I, then 25 female, had just started working as an overnight cashier in a big chain grocery store. I'd been there a couple of months when I noticed this one employee used self-checkout, but hadn't completed the transaction. Now, this can happen sometimes, like someone doesn't realize their card hadn't finalized or something. I didn't really think too much of it, assuming it was an honest mistake. And being new, I didn't want to cause waves over a candy bar and soda. The employee, Marcus, 19, male, did the transaction as they were leaving for the night, and was already gone when I noticed it. So I finished up the transaction with my own bank card. Oh no. It wasn't like it was a huge amount. I didn't say anything to anyone and continued with my life. Until a few days later when Marcus checked out again, and I was making rounds adding bags and realized that again the transaction wasn't finished. This time I made a note of it for the record. We had a record book for all unfinished transactions for loss prevention purposes, noting Marcus's name in the log as well. I figured I had done my duty and continued on with work and life, thinking that it would be seen in the log and Marcus would be asked to pay. Another few days passed when Marcus checked out again. Marcus isn't very bright, is he? Once again he'd done it while I was busy with something nearby and not paying super close attention. This time he checked out a good $30 worth of stuff. Keep in mind this was several years ago when $30 went way further. I did my duty and once again logged it in the books. Now normally we don't have too many of these unfinished transactions, so this note wasn't too far down from the previous record. The record that was mysteriously missing Marcus's name. I fixed the previous record, finished the current record, and took a photo of both. Then I moved on with my shift. Over the next few weeks Marcus regularly checked out and didn't pay, and I continuously noted it down, each time having to add Marcus's name to the previous records because it kept mysteriously disappearing. Finally, I had enough photos for the records and the name in the record continuously disappearing that I thought it was time to approach management. I went in extremely early the next day so I could catch the manager, Lorraine, 47, female, before she left for the day. I showed her the evidence on my phone and she asked to look over the logs as well. Then she asked me to send her the photos from my phone and, for legal purposes, to delete them. Like fuck I would. She watched me delete them and was satisfied. I left that meeting thinking something would be done about it. Oh, how bright and optimistically I viewed a very not bright and sunny world. The obliviousness of youth. Then, the day before Marcus was supposed to come in for his next shift, Lorraine called me into her office. She stated that my 90 days was coming up and the management team didn't think this job was the right fit for me. She said they'd have to let me go. I was plenty shocked, as I'd never had a single complaint from anyone, but didn't really put up a fight as I'm not good with confrontation. When I got to my car I cried because despite all the odds against it I really liked the job and that particular store offered great benefits. Eventually I got over it, until I stopped into the store one day to do some grocery shopping and overheard employees talking about how Lorraine's nephew Marcus was practically useless and they couldn't wait until he was gone for college. That was when it finally clicked that I had reported my manager's nephew to her for criminal activity. This was surely why I was fired, especially considering the timing. I still probably wouldn't have done anything, but this was the closest store to my house, and when I got to the checkout, I was met by none other than Lorraine and informed I was no longer welcome in this location, or any location she worked at for the rest of my life. Yeah, she definitely doesn't have the authority to do that. Ban you from a location she's not even at. That truly set me off. Immediately went home to my computer that, unbeknownst to Lorraine, I usually uploaded all my photos to because the storage on my phone was crap. I never would have thought to check if I hadn't had to leave no groceries in hand that day, because I'd been banned from my local store. I emailed the entire story to corporate, photos included. I heard the rest second-hand, but apparently corporate was very interested in the information I sent. I heard higher-ups showed up one day with a regional manager requesting the loss prevention logs, checking surveillance camera footage, and asking questions about Marcus and Lorraine. A few days after their arrival, Marcus was asked into a meeting from which he left in handcuffs and escorted by the police. Lorraine didn't leave in handcuffs, but she did leave jobless. We lived in a very small town with nothing better to report. I mean, she was altering the logs. Surely that counts as fraud. Nothing better to report in their papers, so I got to read the story of Marcus's arrest and subsequent charges. Over the course of 3 years, he'd taken over $10,000 in unpurchased merchandise, and was subsequently convicted of a felony and served prison time. The best part, I later ran into Lorraine in another store about a year later. She was working as a bagger. The manager who'd abused her power to shield her nephew was now working the absolute least powerful and lowest paying position possible. Meanwhile, I'd had no trouble getting a better paying job with better benefits that I was extremely happy in. Being the generous and forgiving person I am, I let her help with loading my groceries. While she was loading everything into my car, I got a few dollars out of my wallet to tip her. I'm not a monster after all. But grabbed a post-it from my bag too. I wrote a note that basically said, "Sorry Karma bitch slapped you so hard, but hopefully this helps." I wrapped the note in the bills, so I didn't get to see her face when she read it, but I still chuckle a bit imagining it. So yeah, that's my best petty revenge story. Hope you enjoyed it. Okay, just answering some questions that people in the original post had. Is this real? Yes, it is. It's a real thing that happened to me when I was younger, I think decades ago. The only part of the story that is fabricated are the names of Marcus and Lorraine. I can't make someone who is determined to believe... okay, just poopy heads being poopy heads. 2 was I offered my job back. No, I wasn't. I don't think I would have taken it if it had been offered, but I really loved the new job, and the pay was worlds better in the new job. 3, why weren't you offered compensation for being fired? Because you were let go at the end of your 90-day trial period. They can do that for any reason now. I don't know, I would assume this isn't something a company just offers someone until they file or threaten a lawsuit. I was young and dumb and didn't even think of filing one. I reported to corporate anonymously. I had already been fired for reporting Marcus. I didn't want a chance of backlash for reporting Lorraine too. I'm sure they knew who sent them the tip, but I never outright told them. I doubt they were as worried about me suing as they were about the theft. 4, was my ban from the store lifted? I mean, it wasn't even real. Yes, it was. And I still go into that store and shop to this day, despite living about 3 towns away now, just because I can. I am sure the impulse exists solely because I was banned once, but whatever. It still feels amazingly freeing when I stroll down those aisles. Yeah, but... 5, why didn't I tell Lorraine's new job about her history? At that point, I'd gotten my justice. I'm not inherently prone to revenge, and didn't see a reason to ruin her a second time. Well, second chances and all that. She can fuck up the new job all on her own. I just wanted her to know I was instrumental in the original ruining. 6, how did I have time to find a post-it and... That's a weird question for them to ask. And write a note while she loaded groceries. I'm ADHD, and at the time I relied heavily on post-it notes to remind myself of all manner of things. I always had some in the same spot in my handbag along with a pen, so anytime I needed to write a reminder down, I could find them quickly. Seriously, my car dash, bathroom mirror, computer monitor, you name it, they were all covered in post-it notes, almost always. I'll assume you have an app for it now. 7, did I ever hear anything about Marcus after he got out of jail? No, I have no idea where he is now or what he's doing. I hope he's learned his lesson and is living a successful and fulfilled life, or at the very fucking least pays for his shopping. Everyone deserves a second chance at a good life. 8, where is Lorraine today? My best guess is retired or about to retire. Yes, it's been that long. She was almost 50 at the time, so it's around time for that. But I haven't seen hide nor hair of her since I moved out of that town, around 15 years ago. The last I heard before moving, she was still working at that same store I saw her at a year after the initial incident. 9, how did I get so much information about what happened after I reported? Small town! This was a combination of news articles covering the situation. It was a small town, of course. It made it into the papers and news stories. and gossip from employees I talked to after Lorraine was fired and my ban was lifted. Hope this helps clear some things up. Okie dokie. Story number 2. By First Come, First Served, by Xbox Gamer 2122. I worked on a floor with a dozen others, all of us in cubicles. There was a small room on one of the outside walls close to our cubicles that we could use for group discussions occasionally. In the room was a small table that would seat 4 people, or 6 if they were friendly with each other. A new guy was hired, Carl, and he quickly became not liked. He was very aggressive, always bossing people around and trying to hand off assignments to others that he didn't have time to do. The rotating chair in his cubicle was old, and he swapped it out with the chair in another cubicle, telling the owner that his bad back needed a better chair. Sounds like a him problem. He was constantly borrowing things from other people's desks, like staples. There was a supply cabinet on the floor above us. Carl started working in the small room, leaving papers on the table when he left at the end of the day, and then his coffee cup, and then his laptop. One morning we noticed that his cube was cleaned out and everything in it moved to the small room, including his desk. He gave himself an office, did he? The small room was not his office. We tried to talk to him about this, but his reply was, "First come, first served," a phrase he used frequently. When a sign appeared outside the office door with his name on it, that was the last straw. Probably stole the straw as well. At the other end of the floor was a nice conference room. It had a large table that could seat a dozen people, a big screen on one wall for teleconferencing, a table along a wall for coffee and snacks. There was a sign-up sheet for the conference room with the administrative assistant outside the conference room, although it was rarely used. We didn't normally entertain customers or have large meetings, so people would just pop in there to meet there if the room was vacant, which it almost always was, not bothering to use the sign-up sheet. Once a year my location hosted a powwow in the conference room. Most of the attendees came from out of town and stayed in a hotel that was about a mile away. Carl appointed himself as the meeting coordinator and was spending a fair amount of time talking to the external personnel and driving our admin assistant crazy. None of us were invited. In fact, he was keeping the whole thing under wraps because he wanted to be the only point of contact at our office for the important people. Once I learned the date of the big meeting, I reserved the conference room. The admin assistant mentioned that Carl's meeting was that day, although he hadn't reserved it yet. I used the first-come, first-served phrase, one she had heard from Carl many times, and she put my name on the sign-up sheet for that date with a smirk on her face. It was a group effort. 5 of us waited until Carl left for the day before the big meeting, and used our office chairs to transfer lots of paper to the conference room. The table was full of file folders, boxes of files, and power cords for our laptops were all plugged in. Carl had arranged to meet the out-of-towners at the hotel for breakfast, before moving to the conference room for the 9th start of the day's meeting. Around 8 we gathered in the conference room, shut the door, put up a PowerPoint presentation on the big screen, and worked on our laptops. We heard voices coming down the hall, and one person stood up and started briefing us on the presentation on the big screen. The door opened a few minutes before 9, and Carl stopped in the doorway, with a surprised look on his face. We could see people standing behind him, peering into the room. Carl told us to get out, the audacity, that he had important visitors and needed the conference room. We answered that we had reserved the conference room weeks ago and were in the middle of our own meetings. We mentioned that the smaller room, his office, was no longer available to us to use. As our briefer resumed his presentation, Carl walked over to the desk of the admin assistant. We could hear him arguing with her that he needed the conference room. That went on for about a minute or so, because he came back again, demanding that we vacate. First come, first served, was my answer, and he knew defeat when it was served up to him. Carl's group was able to use the conference room on the floor above, but our boss, who worked in a different location, received some pretty harsh emails from the visitors. The boss knew nothing about the meetings, although she should have been invited and participating. She also had no idea that Carl had appropriated the small meeting room as his office. When she went to talk to Carl about the emails detailing the train wreck of meetings, She saw that Carl had moved from the cubicle he was supposed to be using. Carl had to move back to his old cubicle. Revenge is sweet. Story number 3. My professor said, follow the formatting rules exactly or lose points. So I did. My double preparation 241. This was sophomore year. Some Gen Ed English class I only took because I needed credit. My professor, I will just call him Dr. H, was known across the whole department for being insane about formatting. Not the normal MLA or APA stuff, he had his own extra rules stapled onto the syllabus on top of that. Front margin spacing where the page numbers had to go, all graded completely separate from the actual writing. About 3 weeks into the semester, someone asked what happens if you do not follow the formatting rules exactly. He said, word for word, because I wrote it down out of spite, that if you follow his instructions exactly as written, you get full formatting credit, no exceptions, no partial credit for close enough. Cool, noted. So that weekend I actually read the formatting section of the syllabus line by line instead of skimming it like everyone else did. 2 things jumped out. First, it said the title needs to be centered. It never said what the title had to say, just that it had to be centered. Second, it said your name needs to appear in the header. It never said how many times. For the next essay, my title was just the word essay, centered, huge font, because there was no size limit listed either. My header had my name in it 7 separate times, because technically that still satisfies. Your name needs to appear in the header. I also put page numbers on every single page, including a blank word cited page that had nothing on it except the number 7. Turned it in feeling pretty proud of myself, honestly. Got it back, and he had docked me formatting points with a note that just said, unprofessional presentation. Next class I raised my hand and asked him to point to the specific rule I had broken. He couldn't, because I hadn't broken a single one. I had just followed them further than anyone expected anyone to. Then I brought up his own quote from a few weeks earlier in front of the whole room. He was obviously annoyed, but couldn't argue with his own words without looking ridiculous in front of 40 people, so I got the points back. By the next essay, the formatting section of the syllabus had basically doubled in length, and every loophole I used was individually closed. 10 out of 10 would exploit a poorly written rule again. Story number 4. Geek my car off for personal gain while I'm incarcerated. Let's play Role Reversal by Serious Ticket 5776. I, 32 male, was with my ex-girlfriend, 34 female, for 4 years. We had incredible highs and some pretty bad lows, but I genuinely loved her and believe she loved me too. If only that was enough, though, right? During our relationship, I became the most financially successful I'd ever been. Unfortunately, I was also on felony probation and had multiple warrants for failing to report. I knew police were looking for me, so sometimes my girlfriend would pick me up from work, and I'd hide in the trunk of her SUV so officers wouldn't realize I lived with her. One day an officer saw her drive by while I was in the trunk. He ran back to his cruiser and pulled her over. They searched the vehicle, found me, and I was arrested. Because it was my 3rd or 4th probation violation, I was sentenced to 6 months in a community-based corrections facility. Almost immediately, my girlfriend stopped answering my calls. She scheduled a visit and didn't show. Eventually, I accepted that our relationship was over and stopped contacting her. Near the end of my sentence, I convinced my counselor to drive past our old home and see if my car was still there. It was, and I was relieved because that car was basically the one thing I had left to rebuild my life. About a week after being released, I contacted my ex about getting it. She agreed. I knew she had a new boyfriend, so I didn't want to show up unannounced or cause drama. I just wanted my car and to move on. The next day, I had a ride ready and called her. No answer. I waited, called again, texted, and waited some more. 2 more days passed. Eventually, after repeatedly calling, she answered. I asked, "Can I come get my car?" She replied almost as if she'd rehearsed, "Oh, what? I thought you already came and got it. It's not in the driveway anymore." I immediately knew she'd done something to it. My car had been sitting there for over 6 months, and it suddenly disappeared right when I was released and ready to retrieve it. I contacted her sister, who was someone I was still on good terms with. She tried to get information from my ex, but couldn't. That's when I got angry. Over the next few days, I created a fake Facebook account with fake identity and photos. My ex cleaned houses for extra money, so I contacted her, pretending to be a potential customer. I even had a roommate record a voice message I'd written so she wouldn't recognize me. I eventually convinced her to meet me at a house less than a football field from the local police department. She told me what vehicle she was driving and that she'd wait there for me. Instead, I called the police and claimed to be a concerned citizen reporting a woman using hard drugs in a running vehicle near the house. I specifically said she appeared unconscious and had drugs paraphernalia around her. Police arrived within minutes. She resisted when they confronted her, found drugs, and arrested her for felony drug possession and resisting arrest. Her vehicle was towed, and she couldn't afford to retrieve it after being released. And the LP never actually found their car, if anyone's wondering. Fifth and final story for this video. Least Lines of Code Contest. Okay. By Ploppypants9000. I was taking a computer science class on computer hardware organization, taught by a professor who used to work on the AMD chip architecture. He was a tenured professor, set in his old ways, and felt a bit entitled because of his past career prestige. Even in 2009, he demanded that all coding assignments are turned in on 3.5-inch floppy drives. You really had to scrounge to find an old working floppy drive even in 2009. He was very strict and by the book on his policies. Our professor had been teasing us with an upcoming assignment, saying there had been a multi-year contest to see who could write the assignment program in the least lines of code possible. Historically, the brightest and smartest student he ever taught accomplished the assignment in 13 lines of code. Typically, students need about 100 lines of assembly code, and the best can usually do it in about 30 lines of code. I had to win for bragging rights and all. We got to writing programs in 6800 assembly code. I had already turned in a few assignments and gotten the hang of assembly, and spent a bit of extra time really getting to understand how programs really work under the hood. So every program had registers, which are working blocks of very small memory on the processor, usually storing a single value. There's also a program counter which is responsible for executing the next instruction in memory. A program counter doesn't always read instructions in sequential order. It might bounce around in memory as you call different functions. I discovered that when we wrote our programs in assembly, they get converted into binary code, and then the binary code is what gets executed by the program counter. The program counter was a special register which could be manipulated to point at a different block of memory to execute next. Interesting. What was even more interesting is that the computer didn't care where the byte data was stored. It just blindly ran whatever byte data you gave it, without checking whether it was valid memory space for executable instructions, or even if it was a valid instruction. On normal operating systems, memory gets divided into several regions: stack memory, heap memory, and instruction space. If you try to run instruction code in heap or stack memory, usually your operating system pukes and rejects it. But not in 6800 assembly. This was a very interesting finding for me. Finally, the day of the infamous assignment arrives. We are supposed to write a memory tester. Basically, you have a big block of memory filled with garbage, you write all zeros to the memory in one pass, verify the memory values are all zero, then write all ones, verify they're all ones, and if all the memory values are verified, the memory is considered good, and the assignment is complete. The professor specifically said, "There is no cheating here. Get creative. Use whatever trick in the book you can imagine." Okay, challenge accepted. I pride myself on thinking far more creatively than my peers. I have a hacker mindset. No rules? Perfect. He's going to regret that. Even more interesting were the few rules the professor gave. Precisely what did not count as a line of code. 3 lines did not count. Start, end, and DCB. DCB stands for Declare Constant Block, which just means you can store some constant values in memory, such as the digits of pi, a few words, or whatever data you wanted. I immediately saw how I could hack his assignment. "Does anyone have any questions?" he asked the class. I had a question, but if I asked it, I would give away the hack and the professor would revise the rules, so I kept my mouth shut. Good. In all the classes I have taught, the record has been 13 lines of code. I expect the best of you to get this in about 30 lines of code." He had been telling this same story for years to all the classes he taught. Now it's time for me to update his story. So I wrote my application in about 20 to 25 lines of assembly code. I spent many hours shaving off instructions, trying to be as clever as I could. It was already pretty impressive, but now it was time to hack his assignment. When you write assembly code, it gets converted into constant byte data. Remember the declare constant block, which doesn't count? What if I just copy-paste my compiled bytecode and put it into the DCB, and then I put the DCB as the first instruction that gets run? So I did, and it worked. The program counter started at the first byte in memory, didn't care that instruction code was in stack memory, and it just executed it. My whole assignment was just an unreadable block of bytecode pasted into a DCB, and it worked perfectly. 0 lines of code. I announced on our student message board that I had broken the record for the least lines of code. I had accomplished the impossible by completing the assignment in 0 lines of code. Other students were astounded and in disbelief, guessing at how I could have done this. I told them that once the assignment due date had passed, I would reveal my secret. We turned in our assignments, no late turn-ins, as per professor's policy. All floppy disks had been placed. Finally, the professor asked me to explain how I had done it. I was a bit sleep-deprived, having been awake until 5 a.m., so I wasn't super coherent. I took my program and wrote it as small as I could. Then I took the resulting binary, converted it into DCB, set that as the first block of data, and the program ran flawless. To paraphrase. "Wait, you can't do that. That's cheating," the professor replied in shock. I was ready for this reaction. "Nope, you specifically said that there were no rules and that DCB did not count as a line of code. So I hacked your assignment on a technicality and accomplished it in 0 lines of code," I said triumphantly. I got him. The professor couldn't refute me and had to admit that what I did was clever and he'd have to think about it, and acknowledged I had won the contest. A week later, he announces to class that he was riding his bike home from work, thinking about what I did, and that he was revoking my victory by changing the rules to the assignment. After you did it, well, I hope his chain is forever rusty and his brakes always squeaky. Therefore, my entry was invalid. I was too sleep-deprived and unprepared to argue. I didn't care anymore. I won his silly little game, and he's just a sore loser for changing the rules post hoc after the game is over. He can't take that away from me. Even if I counted my actual lines of code, I still outperformed all my peers. And that brings us to the end of today's video. Big thanks to everyone who allowed me to use their stories. If you'd like to support the channel, you can sign up for my Patreon page, which is linked in the description. $1 or more gets you early access to all the videos at once on Monday. There's also a link to my Discord server, my Threads account, and my email is kingofthecities@gmail.com if you need to contact me for any reason. That's everything for now, so until next time, thank you very much for watching, and take very good care of yourselves. Bye 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 bye.